welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, the father of the New York bombing suspect alerted the FBI about his son's radicalism 2 years ago, but nothing happened. Homegrown terrorism is now a more potent threat to the U.S. How should the country adopt its approach to prevent more attacks? And car maker Ford is partnered with global cities on shuttle buses and bike-sharing schemes. It also allows Ford to stay relevant for every aspect of the daily commute. It's the growth of the sharing economy forcing car companies to alter the products they offer. And now, the UN General Assembly's annual general debate has entered its second day in New York. This year, the theme is Sustainable Development Goals, a universal push to transform our world. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is now attending the event and delivering a speech. Let's go directly to the UN to take a listen.
Peace and co-sharing, as well as the green development, can actually stir up the development of China, and it will sustain our development. Talking about the sustainable development, it should be compatible and it should be linked with other stakeholders. Sustainable development is faced with challenges, and of course, different regional conflicts have also been projected. Talking about the traditional and non-traditional security challenges have also been projected before us. Talking about the world's economy, talking about its recovery, it has been slowed down. Talking about the sustainable development, still we lag behind. Talking about the natural disasters, we have observed the frequent occurrence. Talking about the securities and safeties for human resources, finance, as well as the food, etc., etc. These has proposed more demanding challenges for sustainable development. We know that we're at the juncture of the development, and we should be more confident. If the time has become more challenging, still we can never surrender our efforts. The key lies in the mutual cooperation, so that we can seek more consensus, and we can know that for the stakeholders, we should try to contribute more inputs from different stakeholders. By doing so, we can commonly co-share the benefits while being faced with the common challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, dear chairpersons, in order to realize this sustainable development, we should actually cater the demand for the contemporary challenges. By doing so, we can fundamentally transform our world, and of course, our new insights can be more prevalent. We are willing and we are determined to protect the interests as well as the principles as stipulated by UN Charter. Without the sustainable development, without the harmonious relations, of course, nothing should be possible. We know that it's not very easy for us to maintain the peace after years of efforts. Talking about existing UN systems, as well as the UN chapters, as well as the existing UN principles, they have been working out. We should try to protect them. We should try to safeguard them with a determined heart. It is the common interest for all the people, and it is also a very important measure we should always resort to safeguard the sustainable development. We should try to implement the UN chapter as well as the UN principles in essence, in a down-to-earth manner. Of course, we should give fair play to the UN Charter. We should try to support and further improve upon the existing UN regulations. By doing so, it will be more in line with the new challenges as well as the new demands and changes for today's world. Of course, we should establish more dialogues rather than we should be more compatible with each other. And by doing so, the harmonious relationship could actually strike a win-win. We should try to address the world's hot topics, and we should try to address the regional conflicts, and that's the common goal for us. Of course, if we are resorting to the weapons as well as the conflicts resolution in this manner, nothing can be resolved. For different interest groups, even if there is a conflict, we should try to have more consultations, and we should be more compatible. We should try to be more understanding towards each other. Of course, we should try to address different paradoxes. And in resolving these Syria issues, of course, for the international community, we should try to sparkle more collective wisdom so that the holistic solutions can be delivered to us all via some political dialogues. Talking about the Korea Peninsula, of course, the non-weapon issues should also going to be centered around via the consultations, via the dialogues. We like to carry it forward. By doing so, we can actually effectively protect the existing landscape for the world's economy as well as the world's structure. Talking about the terrorism, we should try to attack against the terrorism. On the other hand, we can never use the dual standards to combat against the terrorism. We can't judge the rationale from the perspectives of differences related to the ethnic groups as well as nationalities. We can't maintain what we have been doing right now, otherwise the sustainable development can never be realized. Talking about the world's economy, we know that the supply cannot fully satisfy the demand. We should try to be more synergy-oriented, and of course, talking about the long term as well as the short-term policies should be available. Hopefully, via our concerted efforts for the world's economy, it should be more strong, it should be more sustainable, and it should be more compatible. Talking about the major economic entities, their impact should be very influential. We should be more responsible in stimulating and regulating the macroeconomic regulations as well as the policy markings. On the one hand, we should try to address our self-demand. On the other hand, we should try to contribute to more elite roles to addressing a lot of other external environment. In the past decades, talking about the globalization has become the catalyst to stir up the development of the world's economy. In the world, there is no universal solution. Talking about the economic globalization, we know that for different countries, they have different landscapes, they have different contexts. Of course, this might actually cause some disruption towards different industries and sectors across different geographies. We can never surrender our efforts in sustained development. We should try to stand on more far-fetching perspectives, and sustainable development is the core. The sustainable development is the mega trend for our development. We should try to combat against the protectionism at all levels. We should abide by the WTO principles. By doing so, sustainable development can be realized via these win-win situations. We should try to address the common challenges faced by human beings. We should try to take good care of those least developed nations. For example, in Africa, we should try to secure the food safety and security. The hunger as well as the poverty should be well addressed and to be further alleviated so that they can live in their life in a dignity way. Talking about the international organizations for the new resources, those new resources should be firstly prioritized into the investment into those least developed nations. And talking about developed nations as well as developing nations, they should be more far-fetching, and of course, they should try to seek their development path, which is in line with their own development contexts. After the completion of World War II, we have been faced with the severe issue related to the refugees. The fundamentality is to guarantee the basic living as well as the necessity available to those refugees. The essence is to address the conflicts across different regions so that they can live in harmony. The other things that we should try to practice justice, and we should try to address the climate change, and of course we should try to address the solutions related to the Paris Agreement. For the developed nations, of course, they should try to take a lead in guiding the developing nations in realizing the carbon emission reduction. and energy saving. By 2011, Chinese economy, it is developing at leaps and bounds. It has become the second largest economy in 2014. Let's look at the GDP growth rate. Of course, for the whole GDP, it has amounted to more than about 10 trillion USD. And against this background, we should try to address the in-depth paradoxes during the whole process. By resorting to reform and opening up, we have sustained the growth rate at a moderate and fast speed level. And during the first half of this year, talking about the economic development, the growth rate is about 6.7%. We have topped the list. Let's look at the new employment rate in both urban and suburban areas. It's about more than 13.3 million people. And by the first half of this year, we have addressed the employment for about more than 9.95 million people. So talking about 1% GDP growth rate nowadays in China, it is equivalent to several of them in the past years. I'm talking about the yearly growth rate. It is equivalent to those growth rate in the past few years. To date, talking about the growth rate, of course, let's look at the volume. The volume has been increased by about 30%, but still we can never overlook this fact. That is to say, China is still the developing nation, and there's still a long way to go for us to step upon this long journey for the sustainable development. Hopefully, the economic development path in China should be maintained at the moderate and high-speed level. By resorting to reform and opening up, we can actually sustain the development. In the past, by resorting to the reform and opening up, we have achieved a lot of great results, and also we would like to continue to do so. We would like to expand our doors. In the past decades, we know that if we have shut the doors, of course, we should be lagged behind, and we will never surrender our efforts to continue to reform and open up to the outside world, and the doors should be opened wider and wider. We should try to umbrella the peaceful development. We know that in the past we have been suffering from the wars and battles, and we would like to insist upon the development path related to the peaceful coexistence. We would like to abide by the five peaceful coexistence, 5 principles, and we should try to respect for each other. Whether the countries are big or small, they are equal. We also strongly recommend that by resorting to the negotiations and consultations, we can address different conflicts as well as the hostile issues related to the oceanic as well as the island issues. By doing so, we can well protect the peace within the whole region and areas. For a long time, we have been committed to safeguarding the peaceful consultations. Over the UN conference this time, we have clarified that China should donate or provide about more than $300 million humanitarian aid to the refugees, to the international organizations. Of course, we should try to continue to provide some endorsement and support to some developing nations and less developed nations. For us, we are a developing nation with 1.3 billion people. On the one hand, we should do our work well enough. We should try to address the domestic issues. On the other hand, we should try to undertake the international responsibilities. By the end of 2012, about 166 countries and international organizations, we have provided about more than 40 billion US dollars as the endorsement, as the donation. We know that we have provided with those international partners a lot of help and endorsement. The endorsement, help and support should be more and more. It won't be reduced. We would like to contribute our unique role to the common prosperity as well as the sustainable development. And by 2020, talking about the yearly donation to UN agencies and UN systems based upon the donation from 2015, another about 100 million USD should be available and donated to the UN systems. We would like to translate our words into actions. Dear Chairperson, dear colleagues, in order to realize this sustainable development, it is our common task, it is our common mission. We should try to transform our existing world's arena. That's our common pursuit. We're willing to cooperate with the international community to contribute our unique role to this kind of world where everybody can actually enjoy a dignitized world. And of course, we would like to contribute our unique role in realizing these paths. Thank you all.
That is Chinese Premier Li Keqiang speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York just now. He's talking about a number of issues concerning China's stances, ranging from the war against terrorism to the non-proliferation issue on the Korean Peninsula and to the general situation of China and the world economy. Just several important points I want to illustrate it here by the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. He talked about the non-proliferation issue on the Korean Peninsula. He still suggested about dialogue and consultation as the solution to the problem. On the war against terror, the Chinese Premier was talking about not to have double standard in his words, namely to blindly linking certain country, religion, and culture to terrorism. On the world economy and the Chinese economy as a whole, he's talking about China's 30% contribution still annually to the world's growth. Also, he has been warning about the general economy in the world, suggesting it cannot continue to be weak anymore. Rather, development should still be the top issue. That was, of course, the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York. And you're watching World Insight on CCTV News. We start today's show with an update on the series of bombings in New York and New Jersey that injured dozens. The suspect has been arrested and charged with the use of weapons of mass destruction and the bombing of a public space, among several counts. These attacks have also taken center stage on the presidential campaign trail. Both candidates scrambled to show their stances on national security in the U.S. How much could this issue affect the U.S. presidential election? Take a look at this first.
Wanted man captured. Police Monday arrested Ahmed Khan Rahami, the main suspect in a series of bomb attacks in New York and New Jersey over the weekend. Meanwhile, it emerges that the suspect's father reported his son to the FBI 2 years ago.
You said yes to the FBI and tell them that your son was involved in terrorism overseas.
And did you later retract that?
You told that to the FBI. You
Yes.
called them and told them.
Yes.
And what did they say?
They're not doing the job.
County prosecutors have charged Ahmed Rahami with 5 counts of attempted murder, as well as bombing, property destruction, and use of weapons of mass destruction. Rahami could also face federal terrorism charges for the bombings that injured at least 30 people.
There's an old saying in the police and in the law enforcement, you know, just because you make an arrest, that's not where the investigation stops, and a lot of times that's where the investigation starts.
The investigation is now expanding overseas. Rahami previously travelled to Afghanistan and Pakistan and may have been radicalized there.
He did often talk about the Taliban and believed that the U.S.'s position toward the Taliban as a terrorist organization was unfair, and that a lot of good had come as a result of the practices and the ideology behind the Taliban.
Authorities are still trying to determine whether Rahami acted alone. So far, they say they have no other suspects. The series of bombings has sparked a heated debate about national security between the two presidential candidates in the final months of the election.
As Secretary of State, she allowed thousands of criminal aliens to be released into our communities because their home countries wouldn't take them back. They didn't want them.
We know that a lot of the rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump has been seized on by terrorists, in particular ISIS, because they are looking to make this into a war against Islam.
As domestic terror attacks are on the increase, how to tackle this issue is definitely weighing on people's minds a lot in Washington.
And for more discussion about that, we're joined in Beijing Mr. Yang Mingjie, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. In New York, we have Mr. Thomas Ruskin, who is the former New York City police detective investigator and now president of the CMP Protective and Investigative Group. And also in Boston, we have Mr. Jim Walsh, research associate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Security Studies Program. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. I understand, Mr. Ruskin, that you have to run after our discussion to another important appointment. So let me begin by asking you several questions. First of all, what do you make of the current stage of investigation against this young man, Mr. Rahami, so far?
I think that all law enforcement agencies in New York, New Jersey, and federal have done a spectacular job. I mean, I think it's the quickest we've ever seen someone taken into custody after a bombing anywhere in the world. So when you have a bombing such as what happened Saturday night in New York City on a crowded street in the Chelsea section, Midtown Manhattan, that happens at 8:30. Police find another bomb unexploded about 4 blocks away and then tie it together with an earlier bombing in New Jersey and later attempted bombings on at a train station in New Jersey and bring this person to custody in 50 hours. It's incredible.
Right. How much does this have to do with the kinds of trainings and also apparatus when it comes to anti-terrorism security measures implemented in New York City after September 11th?
Well, all over the world, law enforcement agencies are getting better at not only detecting it, the intelligence that surrounds it, but also determining from the forensics, from the actual bomb fragments, and in the unexploded device that was found on 27th Street, the fingerprint and characteristics on the cell phone that led back to Radani.
And also, Mr. Ruskin, when we talk about speed, it should be congratulated to the New York police. However, on the other hand, people would also wonder about the accuracy if the investigation can be so speedy. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that what we're learning from this investigation, it appears that the FBI may have had knowledge of it 2 years in advance. I think we have to look at that and see if there were any warning signs that maybe a further investigation should have taken. The good news here is no one was hurt in any of the 2 bombs that exploded or the bomb that the police were trying to defuse at the time it exploded. But what the good news here is police were able to take the evidence and take the forensics and lead it back to the person responsible for this and bring him into custody. And thank God for the Linden police officers who were involved in the shootout with him, who were injured and shot, and thank God they're okay.
Right. Of course, blessings to the police that have been working very hard around the clock in New York City and also for the safety around the world. Having said that, though, let me ask you, Mr. Ruskin, final question to you individually, which is, what do you make of the reporting so far that this young man was being reported 2 years ago, some suggested by his father, of quote-unquote possible terrorist? After some investigation, further inquiry did not go anymore. The police ended it there, suggesting there were no evidence. And 2 years later, something like this happened. How should we understand all of these together?
Well, I think we all have to understand that police and FBI, our federal partners who investigate crimes in our country, throughout our country, had information supposedly from the father. Supposedly from news reports, we're learning now that the father recanted his statements at a later date. The FBI opens a case file and has a certain period of time to either continue that case file and recommend the case file remain open or close the investigation. In this case, not finding any other evidence that determined that this man may have become radicalized and or was a threat to anyone in this country, they closed their case. That's something that government officials as well as law enforcement officials are going to have to look at in the future to determine if there's anything better we can do.
All right. Thomas Ruskin, former New York City police detective investigator. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. Really appreciate it. And then let's come to our discussion. Thank you, sir. With the other two gentlemen waiting in the studio for us, Mr. Yang Mingjie and also Mr. Jim Walsh. First of all, Mr. Walsh, what do you make of the current stages of the investigation, particularly of the fact that Mr. Walsh, that we have seen, if we could have Mr. Walsh on the big screen, yes. Mr. Walsh, particularly we have seen some further questioning and now seem going into legal process of this case. A lawyer likely to represent Mr. Rahani in the court, but not necessarily representing him, but rather to inform him of what's going on in the court. So what's the next step, and how do you think this case is helping us to understand the U.S. capabilities of anti-terrorism since September 11th?
All right, well, let's take each question in turn. First, on the legal process, as of today, federal authorities have charged him with a variety of crimes. They are hoping to expedite, to quickly move into court proceedings. If he is physically unable to appear in court because of his injuries from the shootout, they're even talking about doing it by video or by phone. So I think you're going to see quick movement on this. When he was captured, they captured a notebook with him that was very specific in the steps he was taking prior to those attacks, as well as looking at his YouTube channel and other information, have acquired quite a lot of information that suggests his culpability. So I expect that they're going to want to move as quickly as possible on this. As far as what it implies about larger trends in counterterrorism, you know, I think it's very hard to generalize off of one incident. In this case, it works both ways. We got very, very lucky. The real reason why we were able to catch him, as the other gentleman suggested, in such a short period of time, is that one of the bombs did not go off. So they were able to get that bomb, and what did they do? They found fingerprints on it. And they saw the cell phone, and they saw the construction of the bomb and how it was similar to other bombs that had occurred elsewhere. So we really got lucky here in that regard. But there's a sort of systemic issue that you can't really blame the police for. If the FBI opens up an assessment, which is what happened in 2014, and so what does the FBI do? They look on their database. He's not on the database. They, you know, interview people. No one says anything. It's hard to catch people who, when their crime that they commit is the first time they commit a crime. You know, if you look in the record and there isn't any evidence in the historical record of them committing a crime, you can't sort of keep the case open forever.
Mr. Walsh,
and so I think that's an issue.
Yeah, and Mr. Walsh, if I can continue to ask you a little bit before you go, that is, what is the root cause, do you think, for this gentleman? Of course, we don't have much information still, but we have some. For this young man, Mr. Rahani, to do what he did, at least accused of doing, was it because he was originally coming from Afghanistan? Was it because he later became a naturalized American citizen? Was it because he traveled to Pakistan and Afghanistan as a young man? Was it because he brought back a wife from Pakistan? Or is it because that he, together with other young men in America, or women, now have also been receiving these Islamic extremist propaganda and therefore convert themselves to something that is extremely radical?
Yeah, I think we ought to be really, really careful about drawing causal inferences off one case for which we have very little information. And so we don't know, does this person have a mental health issue? Are there other issues? We just don't know. And let me say, causality, you've got to be very careful when you're dealing with outliers. And that's what we're dealing with here. Most people who come to the United States from Afghanistan do not commit terror acts. Most young men do not commit acts of terrorism. These people are the tiny, tiny fraction, the exception to the rule. So it's not really a great process to then try to make generalizations of people who are inherently an exception
That's right.
rather than something that happens a lot. Most terrorism happens, 80% of all terrorism happens in 5 countries, not, in Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere, not the United States. In the West, more attacks are conducted by people who are right-wing nationalists than people who have views related to Islamic extremism. So we want to be very careful here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walsh, for being with us from MIT Securities Program. Thank you. Now let me come to you, Mr. Yang.
Thank you.
Further quick questions for you. One is, should we worry more about homegrown terrorism in countries, whether developed or developing economies, or should we worry more about certain areas and certain religions? But just now you also heard from the Chinese Premier speaking in the UN General Assembly not to do this profiling, blindly linking areas, countries, cultures, religion to terrorism.
I think that homegrown terrorism has become a very serious threat to all of the countries in the world, especially in West countries. Because after September 11th, we know that the network of jihad, the extreme jihad, is experience some kind of proliferation period, which means they don't want to make the war in some countries, but they want to find some homegrown young terrorism in some countries. But we can see from the history that from 2008 to this year, the number of the homegrown terrorism plot is increasing. So that is a threat for us. Yeah.
And before we go, my final question for you, what would this say about the international coordination of efforts against terrorism? Is this case in New York going to be a big warning for everyone around the world, including for China?
For me, I think we can do a lot of coordination on counterterrorism issues, but the urgent for us is how could we make a joint effort to block the propaganda of the radicalism or terrorism ideologies. For example, like some report by FBI that there are about 15,000 radical, to use the word radical website.
15,000?
Yeah, and almost 8% is in the server of the United States.
8 or 80%?
80%.
I see,
So
80%.
Yes, that means the United States has, I think, its responsibilities to make a coordination with other countries.
Well, very important topic, certainly, and we have very limited time this time, but certainly that discussion is going to continue. Yang Mingjie, Vice President of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, with us. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. You're watching World Insight. Stay with us on our program, still to come. Shared bike schemes are proving popular around the world. Carmaker Ford is now planning to roll out further schemes with a number of global cities. Is this a sign that car industry is ready to tap into growing shared economy? I'm Tian Wei, you're watching World Insight. Welcome back. Our world was once a peaceful, tranquil place that echoed to a symphony of bicycle bells, at least in China, but not anymore. Now our roads are choked by traffic, blaring horns. Countries are examining ways to control the unstoppable flow of cars. Bike sharing, some say, is one way becoming more popular. Take a look at this.
Roads full to capacity. Millions of cars pour into the heart of the city every day, most of them coming to many unceremonious halts. This is a frequent sight in major cities around the world. But changes are now happening, or, in other words, trending. Ford Motors, one of the oldest and most celebrated car makers in the world, is getting into buses and bike sharing. By acquiring private shuttle service Chariot, Ford plans to expand its new shuttle service from San Francisco to 5 additional cities over the next 18 months. Meanwhile, it's also investing in Motivate, the largest operator of bike share programs in the US. But that is neither the beginning nor the end. Campus-based startup OFO is currently answering the rising demand for bike sharing in China.
Through our online platform, students can pool their bikes for shared use, which means thousands of bikes are available for any OFO user.
OFO now covers 17 universities and has more than 30,000 users. The company says city planning officials have proposed jointly developing a community-based bike-sharing service.
It's a good example of a sharing economy to mobilize social resources to promote public transport.
Many more are now gearing up to get into bike-sharing services. Many apps have been launched to facilitate easier bike renting, while electric bikes have also been included in the program. Maybe it's still too early to say whether bike sharing can resolve traffic jams, but it's a start and will perhaps help inspire other methods.
And more on bike sharing, particularly Ford company, a traditional car maker, now turning to that. We are joined here in the Beijing studio, Samuel Shufa, who is a global design director of Icona and former designer for Nissan and Range Rover. Welcome, sir. Joining from New York, Mr. Max Wolf, professor of economics from the New School University. Thank you as well. First of all, what do you make of it, Professor Wolf? Traditional car maker, Ford, now looking for new ways to be the leader of a totally new area, sharing economy?
Yeah, so it's exciting to us. We basically believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, probably more like 5 years, all the major automotive industry companies will undergo a massive transformation. The rise of cars as a service and transportation as a service instead of cars as a physical purchase, aided but not exclusively around new forms of autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles, and the fact that the percentage of people who buy and own a private car will fall. Bicycles are somewhat similar. We know that 96% of the time in America, cars sit idle, and about 98% of the time, bikes sit idle. So it's a massively inefficient use of capital not to have sharing. Ford wants to show that, like Didi in China or Ola in India, it's innovative and it can offer services of every type for mobility. They want to be your partner for every type of vehicle-based movement, and that's why shuttle buses and bikes are important and will be more important next month, next year, and next decade.
I see. Mr. Shufa, of course, that's a wonderful thing to have these kind of imagination, but the thing is, how long will that be realized? Our traditional automakers have this advantage over the others?
I don't think they have a disadvantage. I think actually they have the advantage to know how to make a car. Some years ago, some say, oh no, because there's going to be new technology, they will not be able to adapt fast enough, maybe because in the past a couple of decades ago, some EV cars got stopped in a very sudden way by the car maker. This kind of example that did not put a good spotlight on the innovation from the car maker. They try to slow down innovation, we could say that. But here it seems that Ford is really trying to break new grounds, very much like they did 100 years ago when they say, no, everybody thinks cars is a luxury, we think cars is going to be for everybody. And now it looks like they are looking at car as something very in a holistic manner. It is for everybody, it's very democratic. Right. Let's look at every people down to the one on the bicycle. Let's look at transportation in general. And I think that approach is very, very interesting because it may not be a car as what we know.
Well, interesting might be, but will that be successful? Professor Wolf, let me come back to you. Will there arose, Ford, of being a traditional car maker, going to be a huge advantage for them or actually a big disadvantage for them when it comes to this business model? And by the way, there's not yet a successful business model. Many of those sharing economy business models are not really earning money. All they have to do now is go IPO and therefore got some money, continue to run. So is it going to be sustainable for companies like Ford?
So it's a great question. We have seen the independent sort of car sharing companies really struggle. So the most famous being Uber here in the US or much of the world. And what Uber's proved really good at is boasting and using other people's money. What they haven't proved so good at so far is breaking even or making any money. And the verdict is still not in. They could become good at that. And they're sitting at a $70 billion valuation. So certainly their investors hope so, or have bet quite a bit of money on them making that transition. But you're right, they may never make it. And one of Ford's challenges is they are a really globally well-known brand for making cars. They're not known for necessarily being a software company. And part of what they're going to need to be is a software company as well as a manufacturer. do think they have a big advantage in making cars and making what the public wants globally. But it looks to us like the next generation of transportation. When cars become a service, not a big expenditure, people will care a lot less about the interstices of the vehicle. Think about how little most people care about the car that gives them a ride to the airport versus the car in their garage, which is a major capital investment for them as well. So it's going to be a challenge. We do think companies like Mercedes, Ford, BMW are in a good position to win, but it's very much unclear what they would win or how quickly they can beat off some of the major competition here, which includes companies like Apple and Google, which certainly have good records as well.
The other thing, of course, is about the bike sharing. How much of an alternative is it really going to provide to this what we call shared economy when it comes to transportation? There has been a few numbers that we can tap into. A bike sharing boom over the world over the past decade. 11 cities worldwide has such programs so far, though, in 2004. But by the end of last year, there were more than 1,000 public bike sharing schemes in over 50 countries. China, of course, is the leader in the sheer number of bicycles. That has been a big tradition with this country, with 3 out of 4 of the world's shared bikes. Chinese are used to riding bikes, but now they're used to sitting on the driver's seat. So let me go to you, Mr. Shu Fa. This is a development stage issue?
I think that the success of the bicycle here is, for sure there is a history related to them, but I think in fact it's the new generation that is embracing this. And I think the trend is increasing at the same rate as the fitness centers are opening.
Well, Mr. Wolf, or Professor Wolf, what do you say?
Yeah, so obviously fitness is part of it, but we also think that environmental policy and air pollution issues are a major push behind bicycles, especially until we can get to a more electric and sustainable vehicle population. So obviously it's also going to be urban planning. One of the things we've forgotten and we're relearning is if we don't need to make so much space for our cars with garages and parking lots and wide roads, the lived space in cities, which is very expensive, becomes much more open and much more hospitable. And we should keep in mind, we do, just in the United States, have 40,000 serious injuries a year. 95% of them are driver error.
Wow.
Bicycle does help you with that as well.
Okay, Max Wolf, Samuel Shu Fa, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. We're going to continue to think very seriously about that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Inside CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.